Thanks for joining, everyone. So my name is Stéphane. You can call me Steph. I'm from the University of Queensland. And today I'm going to talk about our journey in making technology training resources fairer. Might be a slightly misleading title in that it might sound like we've reached a point where we've ticked off everything. Spoiler alert, that's not the case. But this is about sharing how things have evolved in how we share our training materials as a technology trainer team at the library, and also what we've learned along the way and what needs to be done to get to a point where we tick those fair principles of findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability. I do want to start with an acknowledgement of country. I live and work in Mianjin or Maganjin, also known as Brisbane, on Turrbal and Jagera land. And I want to pay my respect to them and also the traditional owners of Canberra, the ACT and surrounding regions, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples. At this conference, we pride ourselves in sharing skills and knowledge, and I think it's important to remember that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have successfully shared skills and knowledge for thousands of years before us. And I really appreciate also the lovely acknowledgements of country that have happened over the 2 last days. So yes, the land was never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Now, a bit about me. I did my master's finished in 2012 on botany and plant physiology. I don't really come from studying anything related to libraries or technology. That's my origins in my studies. But at the University of Queensland, I have been a research assistant in agriculture. And for the last close to 8 or 9 years, I've been a technology trainer. I also had a stint of close to 2 years as a LibreOffice quality assurance. What was my official position? I can't remember the actual title, but anyway, person who triages bugs, basically. But this left-hand side here, depending on the culture, is not necessarily the most interesting thing. So I think it's also important to say that I am a papa to 2 kids, 2 lovely kids and a husband as well. Have origins in Peru and France. I am French-Australian, but my mom's from Peru. My father is from France. I care deeply about the environment. And I have been contributing and promoting free open source software for a while now, since the late 2000s. Open research principles more as part of my work at the university, but way before that also into the knowledge commons and contributing, for example, to Wikipedia and other databases. And finally, things that I like: music, cycling, maps. Come talk to me if you're interested in those things. I think this is really what makes me the person I am. Now, at UQ in general, at the University of Queensland, I want to talk a bit about my perception of what is the state of open source there. Just a quick note on how we can call it a Microsoft university, like lots of other universities, very much a buy-in in their tools. But there are a couple important systems that we use that are open source. There's a Drupal website across the university. There's a in-house research data manager that is based on Nextcloud. And the library in particular does try and promote open source solutions when we can, when it makes sense, and when we're allowed to. Now, In my experience, or at least as far as I know, there is no mention of open source and its importance in the research and learning ecosystem, teaching ecosystem, in university level strategy or policy documents, which I try to keep an eye out for that. And I haven't been aware of the university advertising their contributions to open source either. So it reminds me of what Hugh was saying just before about how there can be mismatches between mission and actions. But it doesn't mean that in pockets around the university there's a lot of activity and great activity around those open source communities. Now, when it comes to publishing learning materials specifically, because that's what I'm talking about today, we do use Pressbooks for open textbooks at UQ, and there's been a great uptake of that with 43 open educational resources published on there. There are library guides hosted on Drupal, dozens of them that are openly available to peruse. And we do make use of also H5P elements to have kind of rich HTML elements or even whole courses as H5P elements. Now, again, zeroing in more precisely on my team at the library, we have a team of 4 technology trainers, currently with 4. The services that we offer, we've got short courses, usually 2-hour courses. There's a series of them every week. We also offer intensives over 3 days. We offer support one-on-one consultations. And at the moment, my last count was we've got about 44 sessions, so training materials that we maintain, about 22 tools. I've been told that's quite a big number compared to other libraries. You can correct me if that's not right. Now, a little bit about the history, the last 10 years roughly, of how our technology training materials have been offered to people. When I started, the norm was very much PDFs. Offer a PDF for one particular class and host that on Drupal for download, right? So kind of a static file, definitely not editable, but available publicly and released under a Creative Commons license, I think already back then. Now my colleague Paula, who I replaced, and that was my opportunity to get into the library actually, was working on, replaced. She decided to go, right? I didn't kick her out. She worked on R scripts hosted on GitHub to deliver some R sessions. So that was the start of us using a Git repository to host some materials. That was the first shape of it, a simple R script with some comments on there. When, in 2018 or shortly after, Microsoft acquired GitHub, I thought that was a nice opportunity to move some stuff to GitLab. But it was a temporary move. We went back to GitHub because Microsoft owns GitHub. So it's a funny example of how you can justify 2 completely opposite actions with the same information. But we do have at the library a very large organization on GitHub to host those repositories, so it does make sense to also be on there. We started using Markdown to make the text a bit richer, GitHub rendering that as a nice formatted document. Added some more code-focused sessions, for example, some sessions based on carpentry's material, like sessions on Git, on Shell, and also OpenRefine. Great resources that we could reformat because they're also Creative Commons licenses, so licensed materials. And then the next step was looking at R Markdown, using that R package from the R statistical programming language that allows you to do literate programming, as in mixing text with code and with the outputs of code. Right? That was really useful for our programming sessions, for example, R sessions, because we could have one document that renders all that in one go. But also Jupyter notebooks in a very similar way were used for Python. And eventually in the last year, the work we've done was consolidating all of that into the kind of successor to Markdown, which is called Quarto, as a single website for at least linking, but also presenting most of our training materials. And the difference here between R Markdown and Quarto is that R Markdown was a specifically R package, whereas Quarto can be more independently installed and used on any system without needing R necessarily. So that was what we went with, to try and find a way to consolidate everything. Now, in the room, who has heard of Quarto or used Quarto before? Anyone a bit familiar with it? Okay, a couple of people up there. Great. Just for the ones who don't know it, this is a very quick look at it. This is the source document, a QMD file, where you've got really three sections that then, when rendered, generate a document like the one on the right. You've got some settings at the top. That's your YAML heading with, for example, the title, the date, what format you want to render as. That's what we've got on the right. We've got a HTML file. You've got sections of really pure Markdown, where, sorry about the highlighting, you can tell your story, add headings, format your text, create links. And you've got chunks of code. Here we've got a chunk of R code at the bottom with some settings specific to that chunk, right? A label, for example, to do cross-references. You've got a caption. You can also use alt text. You can turn off warnings, so warnings don't show in the final document. If you want, you can even hide the code and only have the output of the code. And this is the code that generates the visualization, and the visualization is included in the rendered document. So this is what we went with, the format that we went with to store most of our training material now. So summarizing what some of the benefits of using that system is, as I've mentioned already, one file for prose, code, and then the output in the rendered file. We've got a website where you find all the different materials in one spot. And when you look at some material, you don't have the GitHub interface around, which could have been confusing to some people using the material, wondering, oh, why do I have all those menus I don't need all around? So improved navigation as well, to go from one lesson to the other, or to link to other resources external to the library. Centralized keyword search for looking through all our Quarto materials. Quicker updates, which is important for us to keep our material up to date when things changed, when we want to improve on it, without having to go through the more stringent rules to update our Drupal website. And HTML features, making the most out of that. It wasn't supported in, for example, just a Markdown document, interactive elements, collapsible sections, copy button in your code, in your bit of code. So I do want to, and the last two things, responsive to different screen sizes, and the ability to use custom scripts as well, pre-processing, post-processing in the workflow of rendering and publishing the pages. Now, I do have a link here. I want to jump to a new tab to, if I can, use the shortcut. Doesn't look like I can. This is what the website looks like currently. I'll zoom in a little bit. And to highlight what I was mentioning, direct links to all the material, all the different tools at least, that we offer training for. You can expand to see all the lessons that we have, for example, on R here. The navigation also takes us to, for example, user groups, like RUQ, R user group, and Python user group, and other websites where we host the intensives and where to book a workshop. in the lessons themselves, we can find collapsible sections, for example, for solutions to challenges, which is quite useful for our material. We also have in other sessions interactive elements that we couldn't have before. So if I go to our ggplot2 session, I can have now interactive plots like these ones. So we can render them in the document itself. And the keyword search is at the top here. So for example, if I want to look up the word statistics, it very quickly will list the different pages that talk about that. And I can jump to them. Now I want to talk about scripts. I'll highlight here, for example, this banner at the top. This is automatically added when we've got an upcoming event at the library that people can book. And that's one of the benefits of our workflow currently. So in practice, we've got QMD files that are the source. We've got also the settings set up in a YAML file. The GitHub workflow renders and publishes to HTML automatically. We use environments for reproducibility, so we keep track of R and Python packages and module versions to make sure that people who want to reuse that repository can use the same versions and have the same results. So renv is the package for R, venv is the system we use for Python with the requirements text file. And that also allows the GitHub workflow to use the same packages. We've got a separate assets repo that keeps our repository a bit cleaner. And as I mentioned before, custom Python scripts to do things like checking our URLs are still valid, or also adding those banners. But there are some challenges associated to moving to that kind of system. I'll highlight 3 here. Obviously, they're more technical than creating a Word document and exporting that to PDF, right? But some solutions to that is giving options for contributors. And we've tried to point people to the fact that, for example, in our studio, you can use a visual editor of Quarto, so it's more of a WYSIWYG experience that's similar to Word. And also different kind of tiers of contribution. In our README, we've got some instructions to say you can contribute to the materials in this way. You can, for example, open an issue, probably the easiest way to report a problem, or you can edit directly on GitHub the file if you have access, or you can make your local copy and start rendering locally before you want to push your changes. So that's different levels of difficulty in submitting a change. Now there's some inefficiencies as well with our workflow on our GitHub workflow. There's an Ubuntu runner starting every time that there's a commit and updating or installing packages and dependencies to then render and publish. So that's something that we want to definitely improve on. And one of the first steps, for example, is using the freeze option in Quarto, which allows you to freeze the results of the chunks of code, like the output of the code, so it's not re-rendered every time if there's no change in the code itself. It's about finding, and it's quite difficult, finding the balance between the convenience of automation and the efficiency of the process. Convenience of the automation here is that someone is able to fix a typo on the file directly and doesn't need to set up a whole local copy with the right environment to then preview the website or render the website and then submit the rendered website. Right? The third challenge here, in my opinion, is having duplication. We've got another website, but it is justified in our view with all the benefits that we get from that to have something elsewhere. And the way around that is to integrate. This is not a unique issue. We've got other platforms, other websites that are very much linked to what we do, booking systems for rooms or event management systems that are somewhat integrated into our main websites, and we hope to do more of that, to have more of a seamless integration. But I want to move on to what is fair about all that, and my first perception of how our new system fits in those principles of findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability. And originally, the FAIR principles were designed in 2016 and applied to data, right? Which is quite different to training materials in many ways. And they were also augmented or complemented by the CARE principles in 2019, CARE principles for indigenous data governance, which stands for collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. But that, again, very much applies to how we deal with data and how we share data. So looking at our system now and trying to find how it fits in those boxes, I'm trying to list a few of the aspects. So we've got in the findable category, the fact that the website is indexed and easily linked from different places. Also, parts of the materials can be easily linked now. We've got repository and website that are labeled with tags and keywords. We are listing those materials in our own digital learning hub at the library, which is publicly available, which I can also quickly show you. It looks like this, and it lists a number of digital learning objects, which has some metadata associated to them. And I could search, for example, for our studio and our training. They are listed here. And we can use all sorts of filters to find them as well. We also have a mirror on Codeberg. This is still a work in progress, so it's automatically synced, but to make it so more findable. Now, on the topic of accessibility, it is publicly available. So in this case, there's not so much to say about getting authorization and getting authenticated to access the material, because it's all publicly available. So I highlight here that it's public, that it's a widespread format that is used. And also, it's about accessing, in my opinion, accessing the materials themselves, but also the contents inside the materials and being able to navigate them, especially since we have a website. Web accessibility becomes very important here, and it is a journey in itself to work on improvements there. We do have a recent addition of automatic checks with using the Axe Core tool, which is now setting in the latest version of Quarto to have on the website itself, looking at the console. At the bottom we've got a list of accessibility issues that we can work on, and with clear descriptions, so we can look up the documentation about them. A lot of it might have to do with how the interface around the materials, but it can very much be also some contrast issues like here, or highlighting that an alternative text is not available, difficulties with keyboard navigation as well. About interoperability, I've put here built with Floss tools, the important aspect of being interoperable. Git is a widespread tool, and that's for the repository. Then when we move to the source files, it is a Quarto file, but it is a text file. So nothing fancy about it. It is editable pretty much anywhere. For the most part, it is Markdown, and you could turn it into a Markdown file without much work. And it can be rendered to countless formats using Quarto. It's not just HTML, but it's slides, it's editable documents, open document formats, it's dashboards, it's books, It's very powerful, and that also relies on its library dependencies like pandoc and typist. For example, this slide deck was made with Quarter using the reveal.js format. And we can use your browser of choice to interact with the materials. And finally, reusable. The license is Creative Commons attribution. Anyone's able to clone the repository, shallow clone if they want to make it lighter, pick and choose the materials that they want to reuse. We've tried recently to do a good job at documenting in our README file how it works and how to contribute and what it is. Now there is a session that's happening right now about good READMEs, and I probably should be there, Swapnil's presentation, to learn more about how to do a good job in that aspect. And we've got reproducibility with our environment managers, Renv and Venv. Now, that's all good, but that comes from me thinking, well, I've heard about FAIR, I know what it is, I even know what the acronym means, right? But it's very specific if you look at how it was described in 2016. Those principles about data are very, very go in depth, right? So when it comes to applying those to training, it can be quite tricky to translate it. And thankfully, people way more intelligent than me have put together some resources that can be very helpful to make training material fair. There's 10 simple rules for making training materials fair in 2020. I've got the DOI there. I'm not putting the authors there because there's dozens. Fair Training Handbook, also a really useful resource from 2024. And more recently, last year, 10 simple rules for training by researchers, for researchers in a rapidly evolving workforce, which was presented by ARDC folks last year at the International Data Week conference. Now, from that first publication, there's one figure that I want to show you that's very useful for what we're talking about today. It's from those 10 simple rules. It's summarized in one single picture here. And what it's good for is that, first of all, it breaks down those 4 principles into 10 simple rules, as it says in the title. You've got those slices. It might be a bit tricky to see at first, but here you've got the Findable slice that encompasses 3 rules. You've got an accessible slice that encompasses 3 rules. You've got interoperable, and you've got reusable, same thing, with different numbers of rules there. Central principle here, or central tip, is sharing. But what's also interesting here is that it does highlight how much it overlaps. Before I was talking about FOSS tools to create or to create the system that we use to publish our materials. Now, that can be in several categories, right? Something that can improve our accessibility, improve our interoperability, and it can improve our reusability as well. So there's a lot of overlap there, and I think this figure makes it very clear that, for example, giving a unique identifier or registering online applies to both the principles of accessibility and findability. And finally, what's great about it is that it highlights where we have gaps, awareness gaps. So for us, now we realize that we're most lacking in the findable principle. The rest of it, I think, to some extent, we are doing pretty okay with how we changed how we share our materials in our team. But definitely in the principle of findability, we are lacking in the domain of having metadata that describes our training materials properly. Thankfully, this publication also has a list of recommended metadata fields that you can use to document what your training material is about, who it's for, learning objectives, requirements, etc. and also giving unique identity. We have registered online our materials in our own kind of repository of digital learning objects, right? As I've shown before. But for the two others, unique persistent identifier and description with metadata, that's something that we can definitely work on next. So that's what I've got here. Next is how our journey continues. We're definitely not at the end of it. So our next steps, even though we have gone from a place of sharing only uneditable PDFs to something that's, I think, better in many respects, we need to work on assigning that persistent identifier, for example, a DOI for each lesson. We could do that, for example, with Zenodo. There's different options to explore. Another thing we'd like to do is list all our material on the website called Dresser. So Dresser is the Digital Research Skills Australasia website, which happens to have very rich metadata. And that applies exactly to that, to training materials. I really recommend having a look. It's not just for materials, but you can have listings of events, providers, and trainers. And when we come to submitting an event, to registering a training material, rather, you can see that there's a long list of fields that are very relevant for training materials, and that would cover that description aspect very nicely. Oops, sorry. We also want to give contributors more visibility on the training materials themselves. This is a bit inspired also by the recent Carpentries materials changes, where they're trying to highlight everyone who has contributed to materials directly there with links to their org ID, for example. Keep working, chipping away accessibility, web accessibility improvements, for example, with that automated AXE-Core check, but also with alternative renderings. We can offer, for example, one-click alternative renderings on the website, say PDFs, and it looks like we're going back to, no, don't go back to PDFs. But it is nice to have a nice formatted document that you can print out, and we can use standards like PDF UA for universal accessibility, which will be available in the next stable version of Quarto, which is great news. We want to improve our workflow. I've talked about finding that sweet spot between efficiency and convenience, and we want to improve our repository structure and documentation. We've done some work on that, but there's a lot more that we could do, because it's not just about sharing those training materials, it's also about making sure that others can use the same system for their own training materials. So making the whole system more reusable for others. It'd be a shame not to share that more easily. And then this is maybe making it more difficult for us, but it's always exciting to offer more training on lots of interesting topics, lots of interesting tools. There's so many great FLOSS tools around, and I've got lots of ideas, probably too many, but I'd love to offer some training on Inkscape, Blender, Julia, a session on spatial data with an iNaturalist as well, collaborating with my colleagues on those ones. And that's something to look forward to. That's it for me. I do want to acknowledge my team members, especially my current fellow trainers, David, Miles, Nick Wiggins, and Cameron West, who have helped with setting this up. Previous tech trainers who have worked on those materials over the years, Kaya, Paola, Andrea Martinez, Catherine Kim, Valentina Urrutia, Luke Gator, Ovais, Hamid Khan, and Fiona Stroud. I'm probably forgetting some people, sorry. And of course, all FLOSS contributors, the community around it, especially organizations that support them. For example, the Carpentries, ResBaz conferences, ARDC, RDA, and Elixir, doing all that work together. Thanks for joining. If you have questions or suggestions, I'm very happy to hear them. This is how you can contact me, and you can also find those slides with the links if you want to explore those in your own time with the QR code there, or the link is the same thing. Thanks for joining. See you around. I don't know if you have time for if there's questions. Oh, well, we're already over time, are we?
No, we've got plenty of time.
No?
Thank you for a wonderful talk. Do we have any questions? We've got a bit of time for questions.
Yeah. Okay, Hugh.
Hello. Just a quick question about the, what was it called? Quarto.
Yeah.
So you can put, did you say you could put Python code that will run in that? So
yeah.
Does it run like Jupyter, or is that something different?
So it is similar to Jupyter Notebooks. You can, in Quarto, so it does support R, Python, and Julia. And the format itself, you can use the Quarto format, so as in the text files that are called .qmd, right? Which is kind of the drop-in replacement for the older R Markdown files. Pretty much you can rename that from RMD to QMD. But you can also use Jupyter Notebooks. So if you have Jupyter Notebooks, you can also let Quarto render that. So the two formats are supported. Yeah. What I might do is probably a better illustration of that is the website itself. So languages supported Python are Julia and Observable. The example for Python, I believe, is an IPyNB file. So you could edit that with, for example, Jupyter, and then let Quarto render that as a nice HTML file, for example, if that's the output that you want. Their documentation is very good, and their tutorials as well. Here's a bit of an overview of all the different formats that are supported as outputs to generate documents, presentations, dashboards, websites, books, and manuscripts.
Did I spot a second hand up somewhere? No? Any other questions? All right then. Thank you again, Stéphane. It was a wonderful talk.
Thank you for letting me talk.
Here's a small speaker gift as a thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.